At 3 in the morning, when the world was quiet and hope felt distant, a single exhausted waitress unknowingly stepped into the path of the most feared vampire in the city. Mariana had been on her feet for almost 14 hours when the diner finally went silent. The old neon sign outside flickered weakly through the rain, casting a dull pink glow across the cracked floor tiles. It was the kind of place people only visited when they had nowhere else to go. Drunks, night workers, supernatural creatures hiding in plain sight, everyone passed through the Night Bloom diner at some point. Mariana wiped the same counter again and again, more out of exhaustion than necessity, trying to keep her mind away from the problems waiting for her at home. Her 5-year-old son Leo was sleeping in their small apartment across town, and the eviction notice sitting in her purse was a reminder that life was running out of second chances. The bell above the diner door suddenly jingled, though Mariana hadn't heard anyone walk in. A strange coldness spread through the room, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in a second. The sizzling sound from the kitchen grill faded into silence. Mariana slowly lifted her head. A man was sitting at the counter. He looked like he didn't belong in a place like this. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, sharp and elegant, the kind worn by men who owned cities rather than worked in them. His skin was pale like marble, and his eyes glowed faintly red in the dim light. Mariana didn't need anyone to tell her who he was. Edgar Valerian, the Vampire King, whose name carried quiet fear through the supernatural world. Mariana sighed tiredly and picked up the coffee pot. "Kitchen's closed," she said flatly. "If you want something, it's going to be burnt coffee." The Vampire King watched her calmly, his gaze steady and strangely curious. Most people trembled in his presence. Mariana only looked annoyed. "I didn't come for food," Edgar said quietly. "Then you're loitering," Mariana replied, pouring a mug of black coffee and sliding it toward him. "That'll be $2. For a moment, the powerful vampire stared at the mug like it was the most unusual thing he had seen in centuries. Then a faint smile appeared on his lips. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile a predator gives when it discovers something unexpected. "I have a job for you," Edgar said. Mariana rolled her eyes slightly. "Let me guess. Something illegal, dangerous, or supernatural. I'm a waitress, not a bodyguard." Edgar reached calmly into his coat and placed a folded check on the counter. He slid it toward her through a small puddle of coffee. "6 months," he said softly. "Work for me for 6 months, and that money is yours." Mariana stared at the paper for a moment before flipping it over. The number printed on the check made her breath catch. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, enough to erase her debts, move her son into a safe home, and finally give him the future he deserved. "What's the job?" she asked slowly. Edgar leaned forward slightly, his crimson eyes darkening. "My daughter." Mariana blinked. "Your daughter? She is difficult," Edgar admitted. "Powerful, dangerous. No one can handle her. In the last month alone, 13 caretakers have failed." "Failed how?" Mariana asked. Edgar paused for a moment before answering calmly. "One is still in the hospital." Mariana leaned back in her chair and let out a short laugh. "You want me to babysit a vampire princess who sends people to the hospital?" Hard pass. But Edgar's voice remained steady. "You stood up to a drunk werewolf earlier tonight without fear. You protected yourself without violence. You remained calm when others would panic." His gaze softened slightly. "My daughter does not need magic or punishment. She needs someone who will not fear her." Mariana looked down at the check again. She thought about Leo's cough from the mold in their apartment. She thought about the eviction notice waiting in her purse. "When do I start?" she asked quietly. The next evening, Mariana stood in front of the enormous iron gates of Edgar's castle, staring up at the dark towers rising above the cliffside like a shadow against the stormy sky. Lightning flashed across the ocean behind it, and the wind howled through the stone gargoyles perched. Along the roof, inside those walls waited the most dangerous girl in the supernatural world. And Mariana had just agreed to become the only person responsible for her. As the castle doors slowly creaked open, Mariana stepped forward, unaware that the very first person she would meet inside was already waiting for her, with glowing black eyes and a smile that promised absolute chaos. Asterisk. Everyone in the castle warned Mariana about the Vampire King's daughter, but no warning could truly prepare her for the storm waiting behind that door. The castle of Edgar Valerian stood on the edge of a violent ocean, its towering black walls rising like a monument to fear and power. Mariana's small car looked painfully out of place beside the armored limousines parked near the entrance. The moment she stepped through the massive iron gates, the air felt heavier, colder, almost alive. Two silent guards opened the enormous wooden doors before she even had the chance to knock. Inside, the castle was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. Endless hallways stretched into darkness, lit by floating candles that flickered without wind. Ancient portraits of pale nobles lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her every step. Mariana tightened her grip on her small travel bag and tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling crawling along her spine. A tall, thin man dressed in a perfectly pressed black suit approached her from the grand staircase. His expression was stiff and emotionless, as if smiling was something he had forgotten centuries ago. "Miss Mariana," he said in a dry voice, "I am Benedict, steward of the royal household. His Majesty is occupied, but the princess is expecting you." Mariana forced a small smile. "That sounds welcoming." Benedict didn't react to the joke. Instead, he turned and began walking through the castle corridors, expecting her to follow. As they moved deeper into the east wing, Mariana noticed strange signs of destruction everywhere. A chandelier hung crooked from the ceiling, as if it had been violently pulled down. Cracks ran across the marble floor. A large wooden table had been split in half, like it had been hit by enormous force. "Let me guess," Mariana muttered quietly. "Teenage rebellion." Benedict finally looked back at her, his pale eyes serious. "Lady Rosalind is not like other teenagers." They stopped in front of a set of massive double doors at the end of the hallway. The wood was burned black in several places, as if something powerful had exploded from the inside. Thick iron chains hung across the handles, though they were currently unlocked. Benedict stepped aside, his voice dropping slightly. "I advise caution. The princess does not respond well to authority." Mariana shrugged tiredly. "Good thing I'm not an authority figure." Without hesitation, she pushed the doors open. The room beyond looked like the aftermath of a storm. Furniture was broken or overturned. A shattered mirror floated in midair, its pieces slowly spinning like deadly stars around the room. Curtains hung in torn strips from tall windows, and dark claw marks scratched across the walls. In the center of the chaos sat a girl. Rosalind Valerian looked almost unreal. She had pale skin like her father, long black hair flowing over her shoulders, and eyes as dark as midnight. She was sitting on a velvet chair, casually painting her nails black, as if the destruction around her meant nothing. The shards of glass hovering in the air gently rotated around her, like obedient servants. "You smell like French fries," Rosalind said without looking up. Mariana glanced around the destroyed bedroom and sighed. "And you look like you need a cleaning service." The floating glass suddenly froze. Slowly, Rosalind lifted her head. Her dark eyes locked onto Mariana with sharp curiosity, like a predator studying something unusual. "Do you know who I am?" she asked calmly. "I know you're a teenager making a mess because you're bored," Mariana replied casually, walking into the room without flinching. She stepped around broken furniture and picked up a pillow from the floor, tossing it back onto the bed. "I'm Mariana. I'm here to help you eat actual food and keep you from destroying the building." The air pressure in the room suddenly dropped. Rosalind slowly rose from the chair, her body lifting a few inches above the ground. Her hair began to move like dark smoke around her shoulders. The floating shards of glass started spinning faster, humming dangerously in the air. "I could stop your heart with a single thought," Rosalind whispered, her voice filled with quiet menace. Mariana didn't move. Instead, she reached for a nearby perfume bottle that had begun floating toward her face and calmly caught it in one hand before it could hit her. She set it gently back on the table. "Maybe," Mariana said with a tired shrug. "But if you break expensive things, your father's going to blame me, and I really don't feel like dealing with that paperwork." Rosalind blinked. For the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at the Vampire King's daughter without fear. The glass shards suddenly fell to the floor with loud crashes. Rosalind stared at Mariana in complete silence. But somewhere deeper in the castle, hidden behind a shadowed balcony above the hallway, the Vampire King himself had been watching the entire moment unfold. And what he saw next would change everything. For the first time in years, the Vampire King's daughter faced someone who did not fear her power, and that frightened her more than anything else. The shattered glass still covered the floor when silence filled the ruined bedroom. Rosalind stood in the center of the room, hovering slightly above the ground, her dark eyes locked on Mariana. Every person who had entered this room before had reacted the same way: fear, panic, or desperate obedience. Some screamed, some tried to control her with magic, and others simply ran away. Mariana did none of those things. Instead, the exhausted waitress calmly walked across the room and grabbed a small broom leaning against the wall. Without asking permission, she began sweeping the broken glass into a pile. Rosalind watched her carefully, confusion slowly replacing the anger in her expression. "You're not afraid," Rosalind said quietly, her voice almost suspicious. Mariana shrugged as she continued sweeping. "I'm a single mom who works night shifts at a diner. Fear stopped being useful a long time ago." Rosalind slowly lowered herself back onto the floor, though the tension in the room remained heavy. The princess crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly. "The last governess tried to trap me with magic chains," she said coldly. "The one before her brought a priest to exorcise me." Mariana stopped sweeping and leaned on the broom for a moment. "Yeah," she said dryly, glancing around the destroyed room. "I can see how that worked out for them." Rosalind almost smiled, but the expression disappeared before it fully formed. She stepped closer to Mariana, studying her carefully as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Why are you here?" Rosalind asked suddenly. "Everyone else wants power from my father. Money, status, influence. What do you want?" Mariana paused for a moment before answering honestly. "A safe home for my son," she said quietly. "That's it." Something in Rosalind's expression shifted slightly, but she quickly masked it with a cold look. "So you're here for money," she said bluntly. Mariana leaned the broom against the wall and shrugged again. "Yeah, but I'm also here because someone has to teach you how to behave like a human being." The words hung in the air for a moment. Rosalind's eyes darkened instantly. The windows rattled as invisible energy surged through the room. "I am not human," the princess said sharply. Mariana crossed her arms calmly. "I noticed. But you're still acting like a spoiled teenager." For a brief moment, the power swirling around Rosalind intensified. Furniture trembled slightly, and the broken mirror pieces began lifting off the ground again. But instead of reacting with fear, Mariana walked straight to the tall curtains covering the window and pulled them open. Weak daylight filtered through the storm clouds outside, filling the room with pale light. Rosalind hissed instantly and covered her eyes. The floating objects crashed to the floor again. "Close it," Rosalind snapped. Mariana didn't close the curtain immediately. Instead, she looked directly at the princess. "You want people to stop treating you like a monster?" she asked calmly. "Then stop acting like one." Rosalind froze. For the first time, someone had spoken to her without fear, without pity, and without trying to control her. The anger slowly faded from her face, replaced by something far more unfamiliar and certainty. Mariana finally closed the curtain again and walked back toward the door. "Come on," she said simply. Rosalind frowned. "Where are we going?" Mariana grabbed her bag from the floor. "The kitchen." Rosalind blinked. "Why?" Mariana gave her a tired look. "Because you're not surviving on raw steak and tantrums anymore." A few minutes later, the princess of the vampire kingdom sat awkwardly at the massive castle dining table while Mariana placed a plate of simple food in front of her. Rosalind stared at it suspiciously. "This is human food." Mariana nodded. "Correct." Rosalind poked the plate carefully like it might explode. "I don't eat this." Mariana sat across from her and calmly started eating her own portion. "You do today." Rosalind stared at her for a long moment before finally taking a small bite. The silence that followed felt strangely peaceful, but from the shadows of the doorway, Edgar Valerian watched the scene unfold quietly. For centuries, nothing had ever calmed his daughter's storms, yet somehow, a tired human waitress had done it in a single afternoon, and that realization made the powerful vampire king feel something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The moment the vampire king realized his daughter only listened to the human waitress, something inside the ancient ruler began to change. The great halls of Valerian Castle had always been silent places filled with discipline, fear, and ancient tradition. Servants walked carefully through the corridors, avoiding attention, and even the oldest vampires spoke in quiet voices when the king was near. Edgar Valerian had ruled his supernatural kingdom for centuries, with calm authority and terrifying power. Nothing surprised him anymore. Nothing moved him emotionally. But over the next few days, something inside his castle began to shift, and it all started with the human woman named Mariana. At first, Edgar simply observed from a distance. He watched from the shadowed balconies above the dining hall, or from the darkened corners of the library, as Mariana carried out her daily routines with his daughter. Rosalind had always been unpredictable, her power surging like an uncontrollable storm. The princess had broken furniture, injured servants, and frightened nearly every tutor or governess who tried to help her. Yet somehow, the moment Mariana walked into a room, Rosalind's chaos seemed to quiet itself. One afternoon, Edgar stood silently near the staircase, watching a strange scene unfold in the courtyard. Rosalind sat on the stone fountain edge, while Mariana argued with her like an exhausted older sister. "You can't just throw people across rooms because they annoy you," Mariana said firmly, folding her arms. Rosalind rolled her eyes. "He was boring." Mariana sighed. "That's not a crime." Rosalind smirked slightly. "It should be." Edgar watched quietly as Mariana shook her head. "Look, I know you're powerful. Congratulations, but power doesn't mean you act like a disaster." Rosalind opened her mouth to argue, but then stopped. For a long moment, she simply stared at Mariana, as if considering her words seriously. That moment surprised Edgar more than any battle he had fought in centuries. His daughter never listened to anyone. She ignored teachers, mocked guards, and terrified nobles. Yet here she was, silently accepting criticism from a tired human waitress. Later that evening, Edgar found Mariana in the castle kitchen preparing food while humming softly to herself. The scent of herbs filled the room, a strange warmth in a place normally dominated by cold stone and candlelight. She didn't notice him standing behind her at first. "You cook like you've been doing it your whole life," Edgar said calmly. Mariana jumped slightly and turned around. "You should announce yourself before appearing like a ghost," she said, placing a hand over her chest. Edgar tilted his head slightly. "I thought humans enjoyed surprises." Mariana snorted softly. "Not the heart attack kind." Edgar's gaze moved to the plates she was preparing. "Rosalind ate today," he said quietly. Mariana shrugged. "Teenagers act tough until they get hungry." Edgar studied her for a moment. "You treat her like she's normal." Mariana wiped her hands on a towel. "Because she is. She's just lonely." Those words struck Edgar harder than he expected. Lonely. The idea felt uncomfortable, but deep inside, he knew Mariana might be right. Rosalind had grown up surrounded by guards, tutors, and servants who feared her power. Very few people had ever treated her like a daughter or even a child. Over the next week, Edgar began noticing something else as well. The castle itself felt different. The servants were less tense. Rosalind spent less time destroying things and more time following Mariana through the halls with curious questions. Sometimes they could even be heard laughing together. One night Edgar stood outside the library doorway as Mariana helped Rosalind read an old book about human history. "Wait," Rosalind said, frowning slightly. "Humans built cities without magic?" Mariana nodded. "Yeah, hard work, patience, and teamwork." Rosalind looked thoughtful. "That sounds exhausting." Mariana smiled. "It also builds character." For the first time in centuries, Edgar felt a strange warmth in the quiet castle halls. But peace never lasted long in this supernatural world. That same night, a group of powerful vampire nobles gathered secretly in the castle's council chamber. And they had begun asking dangerous questions about the human woman who seemed to be changing their princess. The moment the vampire nobles realized a human waitress was influencing the royal princess, they decided she had to disappear. For several days, the castle had been strangely peaceful, something the ancient walls of Valyrian Castle had not experienced in many years. Rosalind's violent outbursts had become rare. The shattered furniture in the halls had stopped appearing, and the servants no longer walked around in constant fear. Much of that quiet change came from one simple presence: Mariana. The tired single mother had somehow managed to do what powerful witches, ancient tutors, and royal guards had all failed to accomplish. She spoke to Rosalind like she was a normal girl instead of a dangerous weapon. And slowly, the princess had begun to respond, but not everyone in the castle was pleased with that change. Deep inside the council chamber, several powerful vampire nobles gathered around a long black table lit by dim candlelight. Their expressions were tense and irritated. Lord Victor, one of the oldest nobles in the kingdom, slammed his hand on the table in frustration. "This human woman is interfering with royal matters," he growled. "The princess listens to her more than to members of the court." Another noble leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "The king allows it because he believes the girl is calming Rosalind." Victor scoffed loudly. "Or perhaps the human is manipulating both of them." The whispers spread quickly through the castle. Servants began exchanging suspicious glances when Mariana walked through the halls. Guards watched her more closely than before. Even some of the older vampires treated her with quiet hostility. Mariana noticed the tension immediately, but she ignored it the same way she ignored rude customers at the diner. Her focus remained on Rosalind, who had begun changing in small but noticeable ways. The princess still had moments of anger and impatience, but now she also asked questions about the outside world. She wanted to understand how humans lived, how Mariana raised her son, and why ordinary people fought so hard for simple happiness. One evening, while they were walking through the castle gardens, Rosalind suddenly stopped and looked at Mariana carefully. "They don't like you," she said bluntly. Mariana shrugged calmly. "A lot of people don't like me." Rosalind frowned. "They're planning something." Mariana smiled slightly and continued walking. "People plan things all the time. Doesn't mean they succeed." Rosalind studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You're not afraid?" Mariana glanced at the princess with tired honesty. "I've survived worse things than gossip." But later that same night, the tension finally exploded. Mariana had just finished preparing dinner in the castle kitchen when the doors suddenly burst open. Several vampire guards entered the room, their expressions cold and official. Behind them stood Lord Victor, his pale face filled with open accusation. "Mariana Crestville," he announced sharply, "you are accused of manipulating the royal princess and threatening the stability of this kingdom." Mariana slowly set down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables. "That's dramatic," she said calmly. Victor ignored her sarcasm. "You'll come with us for questioning." Before Mariana could respond, Rosalind appeared in the doorway behind them. Her dark eyes immediately noticed the tense scene. "What is happening?" she demanded. Victor turned toward the princess respectfully but firmly. "Your Highness, we believe this human woman is influencing you in dangerous ways." Rosalind's expression hardened instantly. "She is teaching me how to think." Victor's voice became sharper. "Exactly." Mariana stepped forward slightly, placing herself between the guards and Rosalind. "This is ridiculous," she said calmly. The girl just needed someone to treat her like a person. But Victor's eyes glowed faintly red with anger. "A human does not belong shaping the future of vampire royalty." At that moment, the heavy doors of the kitchen opened again. Edgar Valerian stepped. Inside, the room immediately fell silent as the powerful vampire king looked around slowly, his crimson eyes moving from the nobles to the guards, and finally to Mariana. And the decision he made in the next few seconds would either protect the human woman or destroy her life forever. When the vampire king finally spoke, the entire royal court realized that the fate of a human waitress had just become the most important decision in the kingdom. The kitchen remained completely silent as Edgar Valerian stepped forward, his presence alone forcing the guards and nobles to lower their heads respectfully. His crimson eyes slowly moved across the room, carefully observing the tense scene in front of him. Lord Victor stood stiffly beside the guards, clearly confident in his accusations, while Mariana remained calm despite being surrounded. Rosalind stood protectively near her, her dark gaze burning with anger. Edgar did not speak immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the center of the room, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. When he finally stopped, the atmosphere felt heavy with expectation. "Explain," Edgar said quietly. Victor stepped forward with confidence. "Your Majesty, this human woman has gained dangerous influence over the princess. She interferes in royal matters, questions noble authority, and has begun shaping the behavior of the heir to the vampire throne." Edgar listened silently, his expression unreadable. Victor continued speaking, his voice growing stronger. "If she remains here, the traditions of our kingdom may be compromised. A human should not be guiding a royal vampire." For a long moment, Edgar said nothing. Then his gaze slowly turned toward Rosalind. "Daughter," he said calmly, "what do you believe?" Rosalind did not hesitate. "They are afraid," she said coldly. "They are afraid because she treats me like I am not a weapon." The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Edgar looked toward Mariana next. "And you?" he asked. Mariana crossed her arms casually. "I didn't come here to change your kingdom," she said honestly. "I came here to do a job and earn enough money to give my son a better life." If teaching your daughter how to behave like a decent person caused problems, that sounds like an issue your court should think about." The room fell silent again. Several nobles looked shocked that a human would speak so directly to their king. But Edgar's expression did not show anger. Instead, something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. Finally, the vampire king turned back toward Lord Victor and the guards. His voice was calm, but carried absolute authority. "In the past month," Edgar said slowly, "this human woman has accomplished what centuries of royal tutors could not." The nobles remained silent. Edgar continued speaking. "My daughter has destroyed fewer rooms, harmed no servants, and even chosen to learn instead of fight." His crimson gaze sharpened slightly. "And yet you call this influence dangerous?" Victor tried to respond. "Your Majesty, the traditions," Edgar interrupted quietly, "are not excuses for ignorance." The words struck the room like thunder. The guard stepped back slightly as Edgar's presence became overwhelming. "Mariana Crestville will remain here under my protection," Edgar declared. "Anyone who threatens her will answer directly to me." The nobles lowered their heads immediately. Realizing the decision had already been made, Rosalind looked at Mariana with a rare smile, clearly pleased by the outcome. But Edgar's gaze shifted back to the human waitress, studying her carefully. "You have done something remarkable," he said quietly. "You reminded my daughter that strength does not come only from power." Mariana shrugged slightly. Someone had to. The tension in the room finally faded, and the guards slowly left the kitchen. The nobles followed silently, their plans completely destroyed. For the first time in years, the castle felt calm again. Later that night, Mariana stood on the castle balcony, looking out over the dark ocean. The wind carried the sound of distant waves crashing against the cliffs. Rosalind had already gone to bed. Unusually peaceful after the long day. Edgar stepped onto the balcony beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The vampire king looked at the human woman who had changed his daughter's life and quietly said, "You came here to save your son's future." Mariana nodded slightly. Edgar's crimson eyes softened as he looked toward the castle behind them. "But I believe," he said slowly, "you may have just saved my entire kingdom." And neither of them yet realized that the story between a powerful vampire king and a fearless human waitress was only just beginning.